Hello everybody, it's your boy Nips, back and at 'em for my very second, count 'em, second video review. Am I once again torturing you with my shitty headset mic? Yeah? Does it significantly lower the quality of my review? I mean, maybe. Is it gonna be okay? Yes, we're all gonna be okay. Today, we're gonna be talking about Hand of Fate 2. I just, man, I love this game. I simply can't recommend this game enough. Back in my earlier reviewing days, I banged out a review for the prequel of this game, Hand of Fate, which I will link below this video. Since Hand of Fate 2 is a sequel, this review will contain some spoilers for the original Hand of Fate, so go ahead and check that game out if you're worried about that kind of thing. I really enjoyed the original Hand of Fate, despite the fact that I found it to be rather rough around the edges, especially when it came to the less than perfect combat, as well as a rather underwhelming endgame. That said, Hand of Fate was a pretty standout indie title for me, scratching a unique itch that not many games of the time even had the gall to attempt to scratch. This game pit the player against the mysterious and witty dealer, who magically arranged cards to give the player a variety of fantastical adventures. Created by Defiant Development and published on November 7th, 2017, Hand of Fate 2 goes right ahead and picks up on all the ideas presented in the original Hand of Fate, and improves virtually every aspect. I am super duper impressed by this indie game, and I'm excited for the opportunity to share it with you. In Hand of Fate 2, the dealer is back in action, ready for another round of tabletop gaming. In the previous installment, the dealer revealed himself to be the antagonist at the very end, taking on the player in an ultimate duel that resulted in his own demise. It's hard to say how he survived, but he is rocking some dope scars on the left side of his body, with a new white hood wrapped around his head to replace his old black one. Guess he finally made it out of his emo phase. Emo phase, really? Let's cut that one. So, what kind of game is Hand of Fate 2? Much like its predecessor, this game is a roguelite Dungeons & Dragons reminiscent tabletop game, where you go on adventures that are narrated by the wittiest DM of all time, known only as the dealer. At the beginning of each round, the dealer lays out a map, comprised of various encounter cards. Each encounter card features a unique, encounter, the player's response to which can result in myriad outcomes, from material gain to combat scenarios, and everything in between. Of course, this setup creates quite an opportunity for roguelike elements. Every time you boot up the game, each sequence of encounters will be entirely unique, featuring a variety of scenarios, weapons, assortments of loot, and so on, which affects your decision-making and moment-by-moment gameplay in some very meaningful ways. In keeping with the board game theme, each encounter and unique item are part of a deck that you can put together before each round. You know, kind of like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering. This introduces yet another element to Hand of Fate 2, where you can either stack the deck in your favor or opt for a greater challenge with the promise of better loot and other opportunities. Of course, building your deck is not as simple as it sounds. We'll get into that in a bit. In the original Hand of Fate, each round was more or less identical, with very little variation. Hand of Fate 2, however, is a breath of fresh air, since every single round, of which there are a total of 22, has its own unique flavor scenario. This is, by far, the biggest change between the two games, and is a much welcome improvement to the rather basic format of the original Hand of Fate. In one scenario, you're tasked with recruiting a group of soldiers in order to fight a major battle at the end. In another, you have to acquire a great deal of fame in order to be able to wield a legendary weapon. One of the more interesting ones that I encountered has you exploring a vast and hostile forest in order to collect a handful of relics, each of which requires a different task or resource from the player in order to succeed. So, how does the minute-by-minute gameplay work? Well, much like its predecessor, Hand of Fate 2 features some deceptively simple gameplay that leads to some really meaningful decision-making. At the beginning of each round, the dealer mixes the player's deck with his own, laying the cards out in a grid or winding path with each card flipped down, its true nature hidden. Each turn, the player moves their token one space in the direction of their choice, flipping that card over to reveal its encounter. Most, but not all rounds feature a handful of levels, or stages. Upon the completion of one stage, the player continues on to the next, where the stakes are heightened as they inch ever closer to that round's final boss. Hand of Fate 2 trades in 4 main currencies: food, gold, health, and the newly added fame. Each time you travel from one encounter to the next, you consume food. Consuming food will restore 5 health, but traveling on an empty stomach results in negative 10 health, making it important to keep your food stocked at all times. Gold can be used to purchase more food, as well as to acquire useful equipment and pay your way out of tricky scenarios. I've made it through 1 or 2 rounds with very little gold, but, more often than not, lack of gold can mean the difference between eating and starving. Taking hits during combat or making some bad draws or rolls can occasionally lose you health, and when it hits 0, your run is donezo. Finally, fame is probably the more rarely used form of currency, used for wielding legendary weapons as well as for completing certain scenarios. This mechanic is new to the series, and I genuinely enjoy its inclusion, adding yet another thing that you have to think about as you strategize and play. Mastering the art of balancing your food, gold, health, fame, and equipment is the key to excelling at Hand of Fate 2, and this is done in part through your moment-by-moment skill, but also through your deck building. You can be very good at navigating combat scenarios and succeeding in the minigames, but without a well-structured deck, even the most masterful of players can fail miserably. But that's not all. Hand of Fate 2 introduces yet another mechanic to help you on your way, in the form of companions. The first scenario has the player traveling with the jolly and cunning bard magician, Malaclips. Along their journeys, the player encounters new companions that add more richness and texture to the game. Each companion offers unique attributes that can help you in combat, and features their very own personal story that you can progress along your journey. This is a great addition to the Hand of Fate series, as it represents a three-pronged approach, adding yet another facet of decision-making, helping you in combat, and increasing the depth of the world's story and lore. Choosing the proper companion for a round is almost as important as building your deck, since each companion will improve your chances of succeeding at different types of encounters, and is more suited to battling certain types of enemies. Much like actual tabletop games, Hand of Fate 2 features an assortment of minigames that keep the gameplay interesting. The original Hand of Fate just features the one minigame where the dealer shuffles cards, and you have to pick the right choice to succeed. This minigame would often determine pass or fail states within encounters, such as sneaking past guards or finding good loot. It was relatively challenging, or downright impossible when it wanted to be. It served its purpose, but left me wanting more. Hand of Fate 2, on the other hand, blows this format wide open, adding 3 more minigames for a much greater variety and challenge. Roll a handful of dice Yahtzee style, spin a wheel of cards like Wheel of Fortune, or shoot abstract blocks with a laser pendulum, just like, I don't know, I don't think there's a game show I can compare to this one. I love the inclusion of these extra minigames, as they really shake things up. It's important that these minigames feel fresh and exciting, because you're gonna be doing them a lot. Of course, some of these minigames, especially the pendulum one, can be quite hard at times, while the dice game, and occasionally the spinning wheel game, are based primarily on luck. It can feel a bit frustrating when sheer luck is preventing you from progressing, but perhaps this is the point. You see, the developers saw fit to include a variety of ways that you can mitigate the difficulty of these minigames, if the thought of failure in a specific encounter is really that unconscionable to you. Some heroes, such as the aforementioned Malaclips, can add extra chances for success to the card and dice minigames, and there are even some blessings and items that can do other things, such as add points to your dice roll or slow down the laser pendulum. Seriously, are we just gonna ignore the fact that this game has a laser pendulum in it? Like, what even is happening here? Of course, not every scenario can be solved with a draw of the cards or roll of the dice, and that is when you have to prove your mettle through some good, old-fashioned combat. The original Hand of Fate's combat was a little simplistic and often janky. After a short amount of time, I got so good at it that just about every encounter felt like a pushover. This is partly due to the combat's simplicity, and partly due to the lack of enemy variety. Hand of Fate 2, in excellent form, also improves greatly on the combat, which, just like the minigames, is an oft-repeating section of the game, so, it needs to be pretty good. The combat, while nothing amazing, serves its purpose fairly well. It feels kind of like The Witcher 3 or the Arkham series. It can be rather rhythmic, and you can honestly just kind of zone out while really only paying attention to the large and rather obvious warning symbols that appear over your opponent's heads when they're about to attack, either parrying, dodge rolling, or stunning enemies at the appropriate times. This time around, however, there is a much more satisfying variety of enemies and enemy types, each of which calls for different weapons and techniques to beat. Encountering different enemies and different combinations can sometimes be enough to take you by surprise, costing you some life. As I mentioned earlier, your companions can be a great help in battle, as each one is better at fighting different types of enemies, and has a rechargeable ability they can use to make your life easier. There are some encounters that allow you to add even more NPCs to your side of the battlefield, greatly breaking up the monotony of fighting enemy after enemy in an otherwise empty battlefield. Overall, the combat is, it's okay. Much more than in the original Hand of Fate, the combat featured here in Hand of Fate 2 pulls its weight as a worthy component of the gameplay, even if it can get a little janky, especially the way the game zooms in on the last opponent you kill as they ragdoll the fuck out.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Okay, so we talked about the board gameplay, the minigames, the companions, the combat. I'm pretty sure I'm leaving something out. Oh, right. Man, this is really going to cook your noodle. As you may have noticed, many of the encounter cards feature a copper or silver token attached to it at the bottom. Each time you face that encounter, you have a chance to earn its token, provided you complete it to the dealer's satisfaction. Complete that scenario with the best possible outcome, and the dealer goes right ahead and tosses the token into a little bowl.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Man, that has to be one of, if not the most, satisfying sounds in this game.
Well done.
At the end of each round, the dealer will bust open each of the tokens that you earned that round, revealing new encounter and equipment cards that you can add to your deck, which introduces a variety to future rounds, or makes your life easier via more powerful loot and encounters. And this is where Hand of Fate 2 becomes a bit of a roguelite game, emphasis on that hard T, because it features roguelike randomized elements while also giving you the opportunity to increase your chances for success, even if you fail in the here and now. This gives Hand of Fate 2 a very satisfying flow and replay value. While beating around will often net you a considerable amount of tokens, you will usually have earned at least a couple tokens, even if you fail or don't achieve perfect victory. Thus, even if success seems distant, there is always a reason to at least try your best, since it's likely that you will earn a couple new tokens that will help you absolutely destroy future rounds. The feeling of returning to a round that previously defeated you, only to straight up crush it, is very rewarding. These tokens even play a role from a story and lore perspective, as there are many series of encounters that progress their own individual narratives as you unlock their tokens. Kind of like keeping up with multiple TV shows at the same time. We all know that dance. Of course, nothing is quite as frustrating as failing to unlock the token for the same story several times in a freaking row, but to me that just heightens the intrigue and challenge of Hand of Fate 2. One of my favorite things about this setup is, as you become more experienced and strategic, you find yourself including familiar encounters and narratives based on the overarching story of the round you're attempting. Say you're attempting a round where you need a lot of food, resulting in a deck with plenty of food gain cards. Well, you'd be silly not to include that one story card where you need to have at least 6 food to progress. Or, say that you're attempting a round that is best tackled with specific pieces of equipment. Well, you bet your ass that you'll also be trying to unlock the tokens attached to those weapons. I simply can't say enough about what the token system does for the flow of Hand of Fate 2. Without the tokens, this game would simply be a pretty decent tabletop simulator with some roguelike elements. The inclusion of the tokens, however, gives you something to strive for from round to round, showering you in that sublime feeling of accomplishment at the end of a successful or even semi-successful level, as you know that you are just a little bit closer to conquering this game. Alright, so I've talked plenty about the gameplay. Let's just dip our toes for a minute into Hand of Fate 2's atmosphere. Simply put, the atmosphere of this game is stellar. The moody lighting, the sound of rain pattering on the roof of the dealer's trailer, the jangling sound of guitar strings, the rasp of shuffling cards or the soothing clatter of dice against the wood table, and last but not least, the satisfying jingle of tokens as the dealer rewards them to you, all come together and create, just a fan-freaking-tastic atmosphere. On top of that, the dealer himself has one of the sexiest voices in recent video game memory. That slightly raspy, high British accent adds significant weight to his witty observations and absolutely vicious one-liners.
Here we come to the end of the beginning, running errands for mages. This will become a theme, I dare say.
The soundtrack is pretty on point as well, as it evokes traditional Baroque, Renaissance, and medieval folk music with a more ambient or atmospheric slant. The graphics are rather moody as well, muted tones punctuated by the glint of precious metals. The combat scenarios are rather less flashy, but they're still okay. Also, special shout out to the Overall, suffice to say that the atmosphere of Hand of Fate 2 gets an A freaking plus from your boy Papa Nips. Hand of Fate 2 is, for all intents and purposes, quite a bit of a hidden gem. The gameplay is absolutely kick-ass, resembling a super complicated tabletop game that you might play in real life, but with surreal elements and a progressing narrative that justify its sole existence as a video game. The moment-by-moment roguelite's gameplay feels very good, including, but not limited to, minigames and combat, which are both significantly improved compared to Hand of Fate 2's predecessor. All these elements are tied together by an atmosphere that is nothing short of genius, best paired with a horn of ale or a goblet of mulled wine. Simply put, Defiant Development did everything that they needed to do to carry this series in a positive direction, as there is not a single component introduced by this series' debut title that was not improved upon or perfected by Hand of Fate 2. I enjoy this game so much, and I hope you do too. I will not be including an edition of Nips's Complaint Corner because this game is just so damn good. Anyway, have you played the original Hand of Fate or Hand of Fate 2? What did you think? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe. You know the drill.
Because they know no better. In the same way, you must step into the void. You are a blank slate, and together we will write your history.